On this day in 1974, George Connelly announced he was quitting football. It came as a shock as Celtic lined up against Rangers on the 14th of September 1974 that George Connelly was missing from the starting 11 and not even on the bench. It emerged over the next few days that he had walked out and announced he was quitting the game. It was the second time in a year that the player had walked out on Celtic, and this followed a walkout from the Scotland team in 1973. Bill McDowell of the Evening Times wrote on the 16th of September 1974, "Celtic and Scotland star George Connelly will not kick a football for money again. Connelly, the player who has caused Celtic manager Jock Stein his greatest ever headache, reaffirmed today, 'I am finished with football.' At his comfortable detached villa in Blantyre, Connelly, 25, said, 'I am definitely not going back, I just want away from it all.' Connelly, who by his decision is throwing away a £200 a week job, has no idea what he is going to do outside football. He said, 'It's not playing football, it's the limelight, the star treatment, which has made me sick and tired of the whole thing.' A shy, introverted character, Connelly had relied heavily on his closest friend Davy Hay for support. But now Hay had been sold to Chelsea, and Connelly was struggling to cope with personal problems and a natural aversion to the pressures of fame. He would return to the fold again, but the writing was on the wall, and he played his last match for Celtic almost a year to the day later, on the 13th of September 1975. Season 1975-76 was the first season of the new 10-team Premier Division, and Celtic's first without the commanding presence of Billy McNeill at the back. Connelly had long been groomed to be his replacement. They were also without Jock Stein, who had been involved in a near-fatal car crash in the summer when he was hit by a car driving on the wrong side of the carriageway on his return from holiday in June. There was no hint of the drama to come in the aftermath of the 1-1 draw at Fir Park on the 13th of September 1975, but the bombshell news hit later in the week that George Connelly had walked out for the third, and this time it would prove, final time. Jim Blair reported in the Evening Times on Thursday the 25th of September 1975, "George Connelly has completed one of the most unique hat-tricks in football by walking out on Celtic for a third time. Today at Parkhead, I spoke to caretaker manager Sean Fallon, who confirmed that Connelly hasn't been seen at the ground since Monday. He walked out during training, Fallon told me, and I haven't seen or heard from him since. Obviously we, as a club, are now looking for an explanation from the player." George Connelly had first come to the attention of the fans as a 17-year-old at half-time in a European Cup Winners' Cup match against Dynamo Kiev in 1966. In front of an enthralled crowd of 64,000, he gave an amazing keepy-uppy display, keeping the ball in the air as he walked to the centre spot, from there to one goal, back to the other goal, back into the centre circle, then along the halfway line to the jungle, and back along to the main stand. Lots of players who think they're better than they really are have been said to think they're Beckenbauer. But few players have been seriously compared to the legendary German defender. George Connelly was one. He made his first team debut as a substitute in a league match against Dunfermline on the 30th of April 1968, but was used sparingly for the rest of that season. It was another year before he exploded onto the scene in the 1969 Scottish Cup final against Rangers. Both Jimmy Johnston and John Hughes were unavailable, so Connelly was given the number 7 shorts and played wide on the right of midfield. It was not a game for faint hearts, with both sets of players kicking lumps out of each other, but Connelly strolled it. With Celtic 2-0 up just before half-time, Rangers keeper Norrie Martin played a short goal kick to John Gregg on the edge of the box. Gregg tried to pass to the left, but Connelly quickly closed him down and intercepted the pass. He danced away from Gregg's lunging tackle, then waltzed around the keeper to push the ball into the empty net. Cue bedlam on the terraces as he put the game beyond Rangers by half-time. George Connelly came to national attention in 1970 when Celtic were drawn against Leeds in the semi-finals of the European Cup. Playing in midfield alongside Bobby Murdoch and Bertie Auld in both legs, Connelly scored in the first leg at Elland Road with barely a minute gone, and turned in 2 hugely impressive performances as Celtic swept to another European Cup final. Geoffrey Green wrote in the Times of the 16th of April 1970, "The heart of Celtic's brilliant performance lay in the right-wing quartet. Johnston's brilliant, close and elusive dribbling that from beginning to end had slowly sapped Leeds' strength, the overlapping and penetration of Hay from fullback, and the central prompting of Murdoch, and the tall, stately and beautifully balanced Connelly." Connelly did not start on that miserable night in Milan on the 6th of May 1970, with Jock Stein choosing to play a 4-2-4 formation, which left Murdoch and Auld outnumbered and overrun in midfield. When he was eventually introduced in the second half, it was as a straight swap for Auld. Many of the players believed if the system used against Leeds had been deployed, with George Connelly in the engine room, the final would have turned out completely differently. Despite the crushing disappointment of Milan and its long hangover, George Connelly seemingly had the world at his feet. He was the Scottish Football Writers' Player of the Year in 1972-73, at one point in September 1972, delighting the Celtic fans by playing keepy-uppy in the middle of an easy 3-1 win over Rangers at Hampden, displaying an on-field brashness that belied his off-field introversion. He had broken into the Scotland team that qualified for the 1974 World Cup, excelling as a sweeper on the night qualification was secured with a 3-1 win over Czechoslovakia in October 1973. But then he broke his ankle in the European Cup quarter-final second leg against Basel in April 1974, keeping him out of the infamous Atletico Madrid semi-finals and the World Cup. And everything sadly went downhill from there. It was a huge blow for Connelly when his closest friend Davy Hay left for Chelsea. Connelly was an intensely introspective personality and struggled to cope with the pressures of football, but Hay had been an invaluable emotional support. With personal problems piling up, he began to miss training and twice walked out of the club before leaving for good in September 1975. Even then, Celtic hadn't quite given up on him yet, arranging a loan spell with Falkirk in August 1976 to help him return to football away from the immediate pressures of Celtic. But when this didn't work out, his contract was cancelled and his senior career came to an end. It's easy to say that George Connelly, an immensely talented footballer, was a huge loss to Celtic, but that's the least of it. Celtic's lost legend is a fascinating account of his life, and the loss of his career is primarily a personal tragedy, if that's not too strong a word for it, for himself and his family. Happily, he seems to have at last found peace with himself and made an emotional and welcome return to Celtic Park for the Champions League match against AC Milan in 2006, doing the half-time draw, and received a long and heartfelt ovation.